Good morning, everyone. It is time to begin. Welcome, welcome. Glad you're all here, including the ones in the back. I know you can hear me back there. Let us go to our Father in prayer and open our class this morning. Good morning, Father. We've gathered here together again as your children, seeking to learn from your word. Thanking you, Father, for all the good things that you provide for us, the blessings, the benefits of being your children. And Father, we are so grateful that we can call you our Father and that we can be called your children. Father, we thank you for Jesus and the example that he lived and emptied himself to come down to earth to dwell among us and to live that example for us to follow. And even though he lived a perfect life, he sacrificed that life so that we could have the hope of eternal salvation with you. Father, we're thankful for all those that have gathered here this morning throughout this building to learn from your word, and pray that you would open our hearts and our minds to receive that word and to be able to apply it to our lives. Father, we thank you for those that are willing to teach, and pray that you'd bless them and help them to recall the things that they would like to say today. And Father, we pray that the things that are said this morning are in accordance with your will and that will bring glory to you. Father, we know we stumble as humans and as people, and we just pray for your forgiveness. And more importantly, Father, we pray for your strength to help us to get up and dust off and keep traveling that way and carrying our cross towards you. And we pray, Father, that we could always keep our focus on you. Father, as we open your word to the judges, we pray for your spirit of wisdom to help us to understand the things that went on back then, but also that we can apply it to our lives and see that your word is always living and active and applicable to our lives on a daily basis. Father, now go with us in this study, and we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. We are in chapter 3 of Judges. I probably shouldn't say, because it'll expose my weakness, but I'm going to try to go faster. And you're going to say, yeah, right. When did that ever happen? Chapter 3 of Judges. We finished chapter 2 last week, so we're looking at finally getting into the actual Judges. What most people know about the book of Judges, where it's just up and down cycles for the people of Israel as they try to follow God, and then as they seemingly just let themselves fall away and moan and groan, and it just repeats the cycle over and over. Chapter 3, let's read the first 6 verses. Now these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them, that is, all in Israel who had not experienced all the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. These are the nations: the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took to themselves for wives as their own daughters. They gave to their sons, and they served their gods. So we can see that is the setup for the people of Israel. You notice that it says that God left those nations there to teach the Israelites war. In fact, it says it was only in order that those generations might learn war. It almost seems impossible to think that that's why he left all those nations there. But remember, he said in Exodus that he left those nations there, or he was not going to rush them out all at once, because the Israelites just weren't a big enough nation to be able to fill the land. And so the wild animals and the weeds would take over, and they just wouldn't be able to keep up with all the work. And so the people were left there until, as Israel grew stronger, they could push out the Canaanites that lived there. Even the Philistines had to be driven out. Wouldn't that have been nice for Israel, that the Philistines wouldn't have been there? Philistines have been there for a long time. Remember when the people of Israel left Egypt, God took them south instead of north because of the Philistines. He was afraid when they see the Philistines, they would be afraid and want to go back to Egypt. And it turns out it didn't matter what they saw, they wanted to go back to Egypt. But that was what was going on there. Remember in Judges 1:28 that it said that the people of Israel, as they grew stronger, rather than continue to fight and push these people out, they were enslaving them and making them do their work for them. And that's not what God wanted. He sent his angels in chapter 2 to tell them, you're not obeying my word. And since you're not obeying my word, I'm going to leave them here. But the people were supposed to learn war from all the nations that were left there. And as each generation succeeded, they each learned. It was almost like their training ground. Their basic training was to go out and fight the next generation and push them a little further out until eventually they would all be taken out. And there would be no more Canaanites in the land. Let's see. We want to remember that God tells us things to do every day through his word, and he's telling these people what they were supposed to do, and they didn't do it. We also are being told what we're supposed to do. Our fight is not with other people, but rather within ourselves. We're supposed to fight the good fight, Sorry, I'm getting tripped up here. We're supposed to be fighting the good fight and doing the will of God. And if we look over in Romans chapter 12, the fighting is a spiritual battle, and God is supposed to take care of that. We run into people, we run into evil all the time. My son and I will sometimes talk about the state of the nation today, and he says, what do you think is going to happen? How do you feel? Yesterday he asked me, do you ever find yourself concerned about where this country is going? And I said, yeah, all the time. I said, thankfully I'm old enough now that maybe it's not going to affect me, but I worry about you and I worry about your daughters. But our fight is not with people. It's not with flesh and blood. It's with the spiritual forces, and that we leave to God. In Romans chapter 12, verses 16 through 21, it says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be conceited. That I have to take on my own as well. I remember when I first became a Christian that I kind of was that way. In fact, the man that baptized me had to take me into his little office and say, you're kind of self-righteous. You need to stop this. And it's like, what? But I realized as I grew up what I was like. I finally had tasted the heavenly gift. I'm like, I've got the truth, and I wanted to tell others about it, but I was going about it the wrong way. And so we're not to be conceited. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Those are our directions. We have a fight as well. But our fight is to control ourselves and to live that Christian life. These people were to fight the nations that were under judgment by God and push them out. And so we just want to be aware of that. It says that the people of Israel lived amongst all these people, and their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they give to their sons. And then they served other gods because of this. Remember, Solomon had many foreign wives and served all kinds of gods just to keep the peace. When God said keep the peace, he didn't mean do as they do. He meant keep the peace with others and don't fight. I'll take care of what's wrong. You take care of yourself. But we're given the same admonition in 2 Corinthians 6:14 as far as not associating with the foreigners, so to speak. 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? And we remember that word from earlier in Judges when they said that these were the sons of Belial. So we're not to be equally yoked or unequally yoked with non-believers, and that's what God was trying to tell them. Remember, we're all people. We're all obviously children of God. But you have those that believe and those that don't believe, as we've gotten this late in life, in the history of the world. And God is saying, do not associate, do not become equally or unequally yoked with those that don't believe. Comments or questions? Sire.
Well, we should associate with them. How would we ever bring them to Christ?
Oh, sure.
We take the gospel.
Yes.
But this is being bound together. This is entering into a covenant with them.
A yoke.
Yeah, a yoke. It's bound together as in a covenant or a yoke where, a marriage, a business relationship or something like that. But certainly not to, avoid them.
Right.
Isolate ourselves from the world or unbelievers. That's not what this verse is saying.
Right.
And yet there are a lot of people who will use this verse to justify not associating with unbelievers.
Yes. Yeah. I keep using the word associate, but it's not that we're not to associate, but rather that we're not to be yoked with them. And usually we're talking about a marriage contract. If two people from different backgrounds have children, how do they bring them up? The children themselves, I imagine, could be confused. Rich.
Also, it says unequally yoked. I think if we would take a survey today, those individuals that marry people from the other denomination, they're much higher rate of divorce for those people than they are those who are within their equal. I think equally yoked meant of the same belief. And my wife and I are the same belief, and I see those that have gotten divorced at a very young age. They try to decide, well, that's a good person. I still think I can marry them, but then they end up getting divorced.
Right.
If we take those figures, it'd be very, very high. The number that married that are not equally yoked, they get divorced.
And I'm a statistics kind of guy, but that kind of thing kind of depresses me, so I never actually get into those. Mike.
I think you can take this a step further too, and apply it to business dealings. Do not be yoked to another person in a business contract that doesn't think the same way you do.
Yes. Yeah. Any kind of, whether it's marriage, business, any kind of a yoking together with others that are not the same belief that you have can make it difficult to live life. Garland.
I think if we just change the sentence a little bit, the sentence is that what's the children of light have to do with children of darkness? Change that's a statement instead of an interrogative. Make it an interrogative, and then, like Steve said, have a reason and a purpose for interacting with the world.
Right.
And so it's not to chase us away from being with the world, but we need, if we're going to do that, it's not just a social action. It has to do with spiritual things.
Yes, definitely. Good points. All right, let's go ahead and look at the next set of verses, 7 through 11. Again, the setup here is that the people of Israel are stuck with the people around them. They have to deal with them, and they had a command as to what they were to do with them, and that's not what they did. Verse 7, And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel, who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim, so that the land had rest 40 years. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. So this king of Mesopotamia is from Mesopotamia, which is actually, the word is the land of the two rivers. And unfortunately, I don't have the map, and there's not a good one. But basically, the land of the two rivers is way up there, up in this area here. It is the same place that Rebecca came from. It's the same place that Abraham had stopped, remember, in Haran, on his way from Ur to the land that God was to show him. And they stopped there. Terah died there, and then he left Nahor there. And ultimately they went back. Abraham asked his servant to go back and find a wife among his kindred and bring her back. So Rebekah came from there. And then Laban also had chased off Jacob with his wives and his daughters about 330 years before this. Karen.
I'm sorry, where are you reading from?
Judges chapter 3.
Oh, chapter 3. I thought we didn't, no wonder I couldn't find it. It was in 2 stuff. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So, yes, this is the Aram of the two rivers is basically the name, and they're called Mesopotamia. It's between the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's way up there. It's where Syria is, not Assyria, and Haran and Aram, the land of Aram. Aram of the two rivers is another way that it's pronounced or interpreted. This Othniel is the same one as from chapter 1. He is Caleb's nephew. Caleb had a younger brother, Kenaz, and Othniel was his son. And it kind of makes sense. We have very little information, but when you remember, we read in chapter 1 that Othniel was the one that led the fight for Judah. They were first to go in and go out and clear the land, and he was the one that won Achsah, Caleb's daughter, for marriage, and then so on. So he proved himself a warrior, and it makes sense that he was the one chosen to be the first judge. And that's really all that's said about this. So it's kind of sets the stage. Here we have the king of Mesopotamia come and oppress Israel. And you have to remember that all these different kings, they're not kings like we think. You know, in today's day, we think of kings of big nations. Assyria, for example, Persia, the first large empire. Egypt was definitely an empire or a nation, but Egypt was rather confined to the land of Egypt. They had deserts on all sides of them and a great big lake above them. So it was a sea. But Egypt definitely had their kings and lived prosperously because there just wasn't anybody around. But then you have Assyria that became the biggest, the first big nation empire, and ultimately gave way to Babylon, and ultimately gave way to the Medes and Persians, and they just got bigger and bigger and controlling until Alexander the Great comes along, and all he had to do was wipe out the existing king, and he took over the world. That was it. That was easy. Everything was already in subjection, so Alexander just had to defeat the reigning king, and we got it. If you've ever played Risk, that's a cool game. Now, it takes all night, so I can't do it anymore, but as a teenager, it was wonderful to play that kind of game and think about taking over the entire world. With the state of the world now, I don't know that I want to take it over. But these kings that we're talking about in the Old Testament are little cities. You know, think about in Joshua, which we didn't really go into, But Joshua, there was a list, I believe, of 72 kings that were overcome and were pushed out. They're just little kings of cities. We call them mayors. And then ultimately you get the king of Judah, the king of Israel, we call them governors. Ultimately the real king that we think of now would be of the big empires, and those are it. So all the little kings that were left in Israel, or the land of Canaan, were all trying to defeat Israel, trying to fight them off, and they pulled an outsider to come and kind of take over and help them, and he oppressed Israel for 8 years. But Othniel finally was raised up to clear the land. Thoughts? Questions? All right, let's look at verses 12 through 14, just to open it up. And yes, I did that. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He gathered to himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and went and defeated Israel. And they took possession of the city of palms. And the people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. So you can see it's already started, where at first the oppression is only 8 years, now it's 18 years. Then the Philistines later on are going to come in and oppress them for 40 years. In fact, they become a thorn in their side for a long time. So the oppressions just become more and more. Even down to Babylon, that ultimately takes them for 70 years. And eventually forever. So the oppression is just becoming more and more great because of the evil that the people of Israel are doing. So Moab is, I'm sure everybody is familiar with Moab and Ammon. And just to be sure, who are Moab and Ammon?
Sons of Lot.
The sons of Lot. The two sons of Lot. And remember that when Israel came out of Egypt, and they're kind of way down in the black area down here, they wanted to go up through here to go into the land of Israel, but they needed the permission of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and well, not Ammon so much, because they ended up going right through them. But Edom, which is Jacob's brother, Esau, and Moab, which is Lot's son, and also God told the Israelites, don't deal with Ammon, because he's also Lot's son. They asked for permission to go through, but they wouldn't give it to them. So they had to go around. And so basically they came all the way around. They ended up defeating King Og of Bashan, and then coming down here to where they're going to cross. They do defeat Ammon, and we'll see that later. So Moab now has taken over. Remember, the one thing I want to make sure we're clear on is all the different oppressions come from different directions and probably overlap. At one time it says the Ammonites started oppressing and the Philistines. So Israel is literally getting squeezed. They're between a rock and a hard place with Ammon and the Philistines on either side. But first the oppression comes from the north, and Judah, who ultimately would become the leading tribe as providing the king, Judah takes and defeats them. And then once Othniel dies and the land has rest for 40 years, Moab rises up. And Moab comes up here. He gathers the Ammonites and the Amalekites. And remember, well, I'm going to tell you about that. And they gather right here in the city of Palms. The city of Palms is also known as Jericho, but this is not Jericho proper. Because remember, when the walls of Jericho fell, Joshua pronounced a curse on it, and nobody was able to build there without sacrificing their children, which ultimately happened under the kings. So the city of Palms would be kind of an area just outside of Jericho, and that's where Moab, keep in mind where Moab is, Moab actually went across the Jordan and settled in here with some help to oppress Israel for 18 years. And he's got the Ammonites helping him, and he's got the Amalekites. You remember who the Amalekites are? The Amalekites are a lot bigger than we think, because God utterly wiped them out. from remembrance on the face of the earth. The Amalekites were descendants of Esau through a concubine that one of his sons had married and had Amalek. And then they associated a whole lot with Midian, and we're way down here. So Edom is just south of the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea, in the Seir mountain range. And then you have Midian, which is way down. I wish I had that map. Midian is way down. That's where Moses ran off to and found his wife, Keturah. Sorry about that. Now I've got Abraham on my mind. Married Jethro's daughter. And the Amalekites always associated with the Midianites. All right? And these are all children, descendants of Abraham. But the Amalekites ultimately left Midian. In fact, history says that the Amalekites became kind of a stench even in the nose of the Midianites. And they were just kind of slowly encouraged to go away. And so they went away and ended up encountering the Israelites as they came out of Egypt. And of course, fought with them and picked off the maimed and the children and the weak and the old and infirm. And God ultimately said, we'll take care of them later. But he takes care of them, and the Amalekites go on, and they end up going over to Egypt. Now, if you think about it, the plagues of Egypt and Egyptian army chasing after the Israelites and were lost in the Red Sea, there's no one left in Egypt. And at that time, a foreign nation had moved into there, they called them the Hyksos, and had started ruling Egypt, and basically took over in the north where the land of Goshen is. And nobody knows for sure who these people are, but that's because God utterly wiped their name off the face of the earth, the Amalekites. So we have the Amalekites here that were in Egypt and had become basically the ruling dynasty of Egypt, and they had kind of spread and made their presence known everywhere because Egypt, the true Egyptian dynasties were not in existence. They had already been defeated in the Red Sea. If we look over in Numbers 23. Just give you a little bit of what's going on. Remember, most people look at Amalek as just a people that fought with God's people, and God finally decided to defeat them completely. First, let's look a little bit about Balaam. Balaam's prophecy here is going to bring up Amalek, but in Numbers chapter 23, verses 7 through 10, let's give you an idea of who Balaam is. Balaam took up his discourse and said, "From Aram, Balak has brought me the king of Moab from the eastern mountains." So you might want to read that a couple of times. It's saying, from Aram, Balaam was called to come to Barak, the king of Moab. So the king of Moab, remember, Barak had called Balaam and said, "Hey, I need you to come down here and curse these people." And Balaam was up in Aram. So we just saw that the king of Mesopotamia was Aram and had come down, and of course we all know about Aram with Jacob going up there and so on. That's where Balaam is from Aram. And he has been called by the king of Moab to go down and curse Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the crags I see him. From the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone and not counting itself among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like this. So he's basically saying, you want me to curse this people? This is people that, basically coming out of nowhere. They are not a nation. They don't even count themselves with the world. God, these are God's people. Just let me die in peace. Let me die a righteous man, because what he's about to do is the wrong thing. And it's not going to happen. Barak insists that he do this. Let's turn over to number 24, verse 14. I'm just going to read a few of the verses, not the whole thing, but verse 14, and then we'll jump down to 17. Now behold, I am going to my people. Come, I will let you know what this people will do to your people in the latter days. Okay. Jump down to 17. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab, and break down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be dispossessed. Seir, that's the mountain range. Also his enemies shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly, and one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. Remember, this is Balaam, supposed to be cursing Israel, and he just refuses. He opens his mouth to say something, and this is what comes out. These are, of course, probably the best known verses about the coming Messiah. And Balaam here is uttering these words. And this is telling how powerful, how important the nation of Israel is. But look at the next verse, verse 20. Then he, that is Balaam, looked on Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was first among the nations, but its end is utter destruction. Amalek, people that most people don't even consider very important, just a group of people, a nation, so to speak, of the world at the time that fought with Israel, and eventually King Saul was asked to wipe them out. And here he says Amalek is first of the nations. He sits at the top. And it's because at the time Amalek was the ruling dynasty in Egypt. And at the time, Egypt was probably the most powerful, at least as recognized by people today, because of all of the things that have been left behind that you can see of Egypt. They have a long, long history. And these is what I'm contending is Amalek was this foreign power in charge of Egypt at the time. So that is who Amalek is. Now let's look on Numbers. Sorry, I closed my book for some reason. Numbers 24, and we're backing up now to verse 3 through 7. Numbers 24, verses 3 through 7. And he took up his discourse. Again, we're talking about Balaam. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down with his eyes uncovered. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch afar, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Who is Agag? Remember who Agag was?
Agag was the king that killed my dad.
Did I do that much reading? 1 Samuel chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 7 through 8. Keep in mind, this is many years later, probably 300 years later, or just about. 1 Samuel 15, verses 7 and 8. And Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, that is just on the outskirts of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and so on and so on. You remember that story now. And Samuel had to come, and Saul's like, Samuel, look at what we've done. I did everything you told me to. And Samuel says, then what's all this bleating of sheep that I hear? What's all this noise? What's this ruckus? If you did everything I told you to, it should be deadly silent right now. And it's not. oh, and he makes all of his excuses. But notice the king there of the Amalekites was Agag. This is 300 years later. The foreign people that they talk about in Egypt that had taken over, they call them the Hyksos. The foreigners, the last king was Agag. The first king had the same name, Agag. And so that explains why there was apparently two names, a prophecy, so to speak. But Balaam said that the king of Israel would be higher than the king of the Amalekites, Agag, who was very important. In fact, in this city of palms that we're talking about now, where Moab is taking up residence, in that city of palms, one of the things that is completely throwing off all of history, to the point where if you're aware of any of this, people are starting to deny that Israel even existed. They never went in and defeated Jericho. Why do they say that? Because one of the kings from Egypt, Agag, his little scarab beetle, I never know what to call it. It's called a scarab, but it's kind of a memento. Sometimes maybe a seal. A lot of things that it can be used for dating things. But his stuff was found there, and other kings in this dynasty of Egypt that they don't know where they came from or where they went to. And so that has been found in Jericho, and so they say, well, then that was so long ago that Jericho ultimately fell before Israel ever got there. So everything you see in the Bible, archaeologists find in Israel, but the dating is so far off, they say, oh, that all happened before. So the Bible was written by people that just had adopted all these stories. It's like, you got to be kidding. Talk about trying to change history. But I wanted to take that time to because of where we are, to mention who the Amalekites were. They were an important people. When it says here that Moab took residence in the city of palms and had the Ammonites, they're basically their brothers, and the Amalekites, who happened to be the ruling dynasty for what was basically the world, and they helped them out, and they were kind of under their thumb, and they helped them to try to oppress Israel. So that's where we are. Questions? Concerns? Do you like it? By telling you things that you never knew before. Welcome to my world. All right, so let's see where we can go. Rich.
How do you relate that to what Putin is doing in Ukraine?
Oh boy. Yeah, it's all the same devil that's kind of in control.
New Bible was written today, that's what we talk about.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. You get so caught up in all this and think, how can these people, and I think of people like today, how can they be so evil? What is their goal? And in a moment of thoughtfulness, I realize it's not the people, it's the devil. The devil's got a hold of these people, and that's what we're fighting against. And we need to remember that. Not to excuse them, not to give way to them, but to realize that we're talking about the devil. He's got a hold of these people, and he always has had control on this earth. Let's see how Karen wants to say something.
But only as people give themselves to the devil. It's always been and always will be. Our worst enemy is ourself.
Yes.
Because the devil can only tempt us by lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, and pride of the life.
Yes.
So if the devil has a hold of us, it's because sin lies at our door, because lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, and pride of life.
Yes.
Ours.
And for us, it's a spiritual battle. It literally is. And I think sometimes that phrase gets overused, and we're not really sure what it means, spiritual battle. I look at it as, when you read in Revelation, it says the devil was chained. We look at the Bible and we see that there's demon possessions, right down to the time of Christ, and evil was there, almost embodied. It was in front of you. The magicians could do the same things that Moses could do. It doesn't make any sense. The prophets could do things by God's power, but the evil people could do things by Satan's power. And it's like, well, how do they have that? We don't see that anymore. And that's because the devil's been chained. But the devil's chained. He's not gone. and we are encouraged to stay away. Think of it as a dog on a chain. The dog's still alive. The dog can bite. But as long as you don't walk into that radius of that chain, you're okay. But if you want to go tempt fate, just walk right up to that dog and see if he bites. And the devil will too. He is chained, but so we have that. So we don't have to worry about unwilling possession, so to speak. But we do have to be careful that because he is still alive. Mike.
It's like what you were talking about before, controlling yourself. You have to have control of yourself, but I don't believe that you can control yourself without the Lord's help.
Amen.
And you need to lean on Him, and how you do that is to know what's in that book.
That's exactly right. We have to rely on God. When I say that, we look at the Old Testament and the people of Israel that would look at those things around them and bow down to other gods, and we say, well, we would never do that. Think again. All it takes is for us to walk through life and notice something and say, oh, that looks interesting. Let's go find out what that's about. And we have to be careful. That's all they did too. They looked at the nations around them and say, well, we don't do that. Why don't we do that? Let's go find out what they're doing. That's all it takes. And now they've got our attention. We have to be careful. And if we would just immerse ourselves in the Word of God, then we won't be tempted to question, well, what are they doing over here? Because we'll realize it doesn't look like what I'm reading about, so I'm not going to go there. And that's all we have to do. That's all we have time for. Thank you for your attention.